now. There is still no agreement between the BiH authorities how to help migrants. The weather is getting worse. What will happen to the people who are outside at the moment?
Well, I think that we have seen this also the last two winters. The people that are outside, and we have probably an estimated 2,500 migrants outside, mostly in Unasana canton, in the mountains, in the forest, in abandoned buildings. Once the weather gets bad, we will start seeing those people suffering from the cold. We will start seeing diseases increase. And we will also start seeing the local population's problems increase because, of course, some of those migrants, if they don't have anywhere to go, they may come down to the city center again and maybe break into abandoned houses. So the situation will get quite dire for those people if no additional accommodation is established between now and I would say somewhere mid-November.
Why did BiH come to the situation when it comes to accommodation and care for migrants?
Well, I think it has been the same problem since the very beginning of the crisis, in the sense that migration management is a responsibility or a competence of the state level. And it has been very difficult, first of all, to get a consensus at the state level to look at this migration issue as an issue that affects the whole country and not just Unasana canton and Sarajevo canton or Tuzla canton. Secondly, as you know, the decision-making process in Bosnia and Herzegovina is very complex. And while the state is responsible, it is also impossible to move forward if there is no consensus and collaboration between the different levels, whether it's the entity levels or the cantonal levels and the state government. And I think the issue of a lack of consensus, both at the central level and top-down level, has been hindering Bosnia and Herzegovina in its response. And then finally, I think that there has been sometimes the thinking that Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the solution to the migrant situation is to stop the migrants from coming to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, while maybe the flow of migrants coming into Bosnia and Herzegovina could be reduced, other countries' examples have seen that it's impossible to entirely stop this flow as long as migrants want to come to transit through other parts of the European Union. And I think there's not been enough looking at the problem in a different way and seeing that, okay, maybe Bosnia and Herzegovina does not want to have migrants transiting to its territory, but this is something that will continue and we can only control it up to a certain point. So we need to resolve the issue as it presents itself, meaning migrants transiting through Bosnia. Therefore, we need to set up sufficient accommodation and make sure that migrants have access to services and don't cause problems for the local population. So it's the lack of consensus and looking at the problem maybe in what I think is a mistaken way.
You said that there are places to accommodate all migrants who are in BiH. What are the locations where they can be located at this point?
Well, currently we have two large migrant accommodation centers in Sarajevo, but they are full. Together they hold about 3,500 people. Then in Unasana canton we have Lipa, which has 1,000 people. We have Sedra and Borigi, which hold about 300 people each for families and children. And we have these controversial centers, if I can put it in those terms, Miral and Bira. Now all the centers are currently full, except for Bira. Bira has about 500 people in it and has a capacity of 1,500. So, but the local authorities at the cantonal level refuse to allow IOM to accommodate more migrants in Bira because they want Bira to be closed. So,
why?
If they, well, that you have to ask them why they want to close Bira. My point on Bira has always been, when it comes to Bira was established, let's not forget, it was established by the State Council of Ministers, the former state government, in March of last year. So it is an official center. Now, whether we keep Bira open or not, IOM does not have a position on this. My position has simply been, as IOM, we can close BiH, but then we need an alternative. And we don't have an alternative, because if tomorrow these 500 people from BiH would have to leave BiH, there is nowhere that they can go. So not to forget that we have 2,500 people that are currently living outside the centers. So the very short-term solution could be to allow, again, BiH to operate at its full capacity. So we would be able to accommodate 1,000 people from those sleeping outside immediately into BiH, if that would be authorized by the local authorities. For the others, unfortunately, currently, the only solution would be to establish a new accommodation center, which is something I think that IOM and others have been alerting the authorities to for quite some time. That doesn't have to be a center that is in Unasana canton. It doesn't have to be in Sarajevo. That is not for IOM to decide. That is for the authorities to decide. But it is clear at this point in time that even if BiH would be allowed to continue, even if we could go back to the normal capacity of 1,500, we would still need to have an additional place to make sure that nobody needs to sleep outside for the winter.
How much money has been set aside so far for the needs of accommodation of migrants in BiH, and who has financed all the reception centers created so far? Is everything financed from the funds that the EU has allocated to BiH to solve the migrant crisis?
Well, let me first. So far, the European Union has allocated more than 50 million euros to the migrant crisis response in BiH. Where has that money gone? Well, so far about close to 40 million euros by now has been spent, 36 million euros. Some of that money has gone, about 7-8 million, to the establishment of the centers that you see now, the initial cost of buying of containers, construction of the infrastructure, setting up kitchens, these type of things, buying beddings, making sure there's heating, these type of costs. Then about 25 million euros has gone to providing humanitarian assistance in those centers. That means everything from food. We provide currently about 18 to 20,000 meals every day, to providing people with clothes, shoes, blankets, access to health services, protection services, and then the remainder of that money has gone to support BiH institutions that are working on the migration crisis response. I have to emphasize that the allocation of that money, while it is European money, is decided through a board, which includes also representatives of the state government. So the state government of Bosnia and Herzegovina has a say as to where the money needs to be sent. In addition to that, IOM reports to the Council of Ministers every month on how the money has been spent in the preceding months. That money is not, when it comes to the humanitarian assistance, it's not just used by IOM, it's also used by organizations such as the Red Cross, which provides food, Pomozi Ba, which provides food, UNICEF, which provides protection for children, UNFPA, which works with protection of women amongst the migrants, and UNHCR, which focuses on asylum seekers amongst the migrants. In addition to the money that has been provided by the European Union, other donors have stepped in as well. For example, we received $500,000 from USAID during Corona to help us to establish the Lipa camp, which is a camp that has 1,000 people in Unasana canton, and that was established to deal with Corona, and USAID provided money for that. In addition, we also have received funds, smaller funds from other donors, including the Qatar Religious Foundation, the Council of Europe Development Bank, and some others.
Will we now get into a situation where the accommodation for which the money has already been spent is not used because the local and state authority cannot agree?
Well, I mean, I think the answer is no, except with the exception of BiH, where IOM is waiting for a decision from the state-level authorities what will happen with BiH. BiH, for now, we are not using it full capacity. As I said, we're only using it for 500 people, even though we have the space for 1,500. But all the other centers we continue to use. I just wanted to use the opportunity to flag one additional challenge that we face. We have this camp Lipa in Unasana canton, which, as I said, was established to make sure that during the Corona times, in the initial period, no migrants were outside. Now, that camp was established for the summer period, meaning that the infrastructure, the tents and so on, are suitable for good weather conditions. There was an idea to maybe winterize the camp, but the condition was always very clear, and that was also something that was put forward by the European Union, who is the principal donor, and that the authorities at the cantonal level and at the federation level needed to provide connection for water and electricity to the camp, because the camp is quite remote, and without access to water and electricity through the normal system, it is impossible to make it ready for the winter. Now, this water and electricity was never done, or at least so far it has not been done. So the risk is that we now have is that Lipa, once the weather gets really cold, that it will no longer be a place for migrants to stay, because simply the conditions will become unacceptable if there would be snow or if it starts freezing during the night. So then we risk to have an additional problem. In addition to the 2,500 people that are already outside, if Lipa becomes no longer usable because we cannot adapt it for the winter, well, that means that we have 1,000 people in addition to the 2,500 that do not have a solution for the winter. So that's why I'm quite concerned about where we are going, because the winter will start quite soon, and we have these 2,500 people outside. I think the numbers will go down a little bit before the winter, in the sense that some people will still try to quickly go to Croatia. Others may decide to return back to Serbia, so the numbers may go down a little bit. But if you add to that the uncertainty over the 1,000 people that are currently in Lipa and whether we will be able to winterize Lipa, I'm worried that we may face a winter where we will have maybe 3,000 people that have no solution. And the other centers are not a solution because they are full.
And who is responsible for that?
Well, I mean, I think it's... I've said this before. I think that it is not the right moment, or it's not particularly useful to say, which person is guilty of this, or which entity is guilty of that. I don't believe that this is the appropriate discussion now. What I think is an appropriate discussion is to say, okay, how do we move? How can we actually avoid a humanitarian crisis in the winter? And there, I think it is quite clear what needs to happen. Two things need to happen. First, there needs to be a rapid national consensus, meaning at the state level, as to how to address this migration situation, how to avoid that we have 3,000 people sleeping outside with all the problems for those migrants and for the local population. Secondly, we need to have some sort of consensus and collaboration between the lower level authorities and the state, because the state will not be able to implement something if the local level authorities don't collaborate. And I think, again, if you look at the migrants, where they are going or where they are present in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're coming in from Montenegro to Trebinje. They're coming in from Serbia through Republika Srpska. They are in Tuzla canton. They are in Sarajevo canton. They are in Unasana canton. There are some migrants now also in Canton 10. So it's no longer just an issue that is a problem, if you want, of one canton or two cantons. It's an issue that affects the whole country. And it is high time that we treat it as such, and that it is something that requires a national consensus to find workable solutions. And we are running out of time. My additional worry on this is, of course, that we have local elections the middle of November, and an election time is always a more difficult period for having this type of consensus or having this type of collaboration from happening. But frankly, I don't think that we have a choice, because the winter is coming very rapidly. And if we are going to have any additional centers, independent where they are, that will take time to establish. It's not that the authorities would give a location and within a day migrants can come there. No, it requires works, it requires infrastructure, and these things take time. I mean, that's the way it is, and that we have seen that in the past when we were setting up new centers rapidly before the winter.
In your opinion, what is the solution for the estimated 8,000 people who are estimated to be migrants and refugees in BiH?
Well, I think the solution starts and stops with ensuring that there is sufficient official accommodation. So the first thing that is required, and that is absolutely required, is to create some additional capacity. How much additional capacity we need depends on the future of BiH and depends on the future of LIPA. But it is clear that we need to have accommodation that can house the 8,500 people that we have in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And if that is in place, then the services can be provided there. I think that is for me, in a very short term, that is the absolute priority. Because without that, again, and I want to emphasize that because it's really important, providing this accommodation is not just to help the migrants, it is also to help the local population of Bosnia and Herzegovina, specifically those people living in places like Velika Kladuša and BiH, who will be the first people who will see their daily life interrupted if we have hundreds, if not more, migrants sleeping in the streets over the winter.
Is there a responsibility of the United Nations and EU? What do you mean?
No, okay, from a legal perspective, if once migrants come on the territory of a country, whether it's Bosnia and Herzegovina or any other country, it is a responsibility of the state to deal with those people, whether it is to give them access to asylum process if they want to apply for asylum in Bosnia and Herzegovina, whether it is to provide them access to basic humanitarian assistance while they're in the country, whether it is any other measures that are foreseen under national law. It is first and utmost a state responsibility. When it comes to the United Nations and the European Union, our function is quite clear. And especially, and I can only speak for the United Nations, our function is to support the authorities to deal with this, for Bosnia and Herzegovina, a relatively new phenomenon, having migrants and asylum seekers and refugees coming through its territory. So the role of the United Nations and IOM is to support the authorities. It is not up to us to decide what should happen with the migrants and the refugees that are coming on the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is for Bosnia and Herzegovina to decide in accordance with national laws, but also in accordance with the international conventions that Bosnia and Herzegovina has signed up to, whether it's the Refugee Convention, whether it's human rights conventions, any other international law that applies to Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, needs to be taken into account. So the first responsibility is Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it is, of course, clear that Bosnia and Herzegovina needs and has received a lot of international support financially from the European Union, operationally from IOM and other UN agencies to deal with the situation. But for our response, we depend upon political decision-making by authorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina.